Hello everyone. My name is Elise. Welcome to my channel. We are doing some moody lighting today because it is later in the afternoon and I just had to wait so long for my dog to stop eating his food because you could hear the crunching so loudly on the camera, but he's worth it. So he just finished feeding and now we can have a little chat. And we're going to be going over all of the books that I read in the month of August. I do feel like August was the return to reading for me a little bit. I felt like I've been in like months long reading slump where I wasn't enjoying a lot of what I was reading. Just felt like I was having to push myself to read a little bit more than I typically would. And this month I read some fantastic things that made me excited to keep picking up books again. So we're going to get into them. Like usual with my wrap-ups, they're gonna go in the order that I read them. And that is how we will begin because the first book I read this month was phenomenal. So that book is The Book of Eve. This is by Carmen Boullosa and it's translated from the Spanish by Samantha Schnee, published by Deep Vellum. And I've talked about this book so much. It is my most anticipated fiction book of 2023. And oh boy, did it live up to the hype for me. I'm so happy this lived up to the hype for me because I was a little worried that I had hyped it too much for myself. This book is a retelling of the Book of Genesis from Eve's perspective. And you sort of know from the get-go that she thinks most of the book is a lie and has been told incorrectly. So she's here to sort of change the narrative about herself and about others. This was so freaking good. Oh my God. The structure is really interesting. It's told in books and then chapters within those books, very similar to the Bible. So for instance, like here's 2 chapters that are within one of the books. Some can be really short like that, some are longer. It's meant to be mimicking the Bible all along the way, and I thought that was really, really smartly done. This book had so much cleverness to it. She kept weaving in the Bible in very interesting ways. So it does help to have some reference of what the Book of Genesis is like. You don't need to necessarily have like read it word for word, but to know some of the like big hitters from it. For example, like referencing "it is good" a lot, which is a common refrain in the Book of Genesis. She then reuses that in a different way in this book and things like that. She's very much repurposing what was used for, in her view, a malicious purpose and trying to reclaim back her narrative and the truth. This had so many good things to say about women's pleasure and sexuality, hence the kind of like vulva cover here. There's a really interesting parable almost about the formation of the clitoris. And yeah, there's so much interesting stuff in here. At the end of every book, there's also what they call like loose pages, I think, which are other documents or writings that they found that are in addition to that book, kind of about whatever Eve spoke on in that specific book, that are either from her or other people throughout the narrative. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of context to have at the end of the book. It gave a little bit more credibility to Eve's story by having other people voice in of like, oh, well, I interpreted it this way, or like, yes, I agree with her. That was definitely happening. I felt like that was a good addition and helped you to not get annoyed maybe with Eve, because she does paint herself in a good light in this, but I think it's justified. So yeah, so many fantastic things in here. If you like religious criticism, then I think this could really work well for you. It again was just so brilliant, so brilliant. Even the introduction was phenomenal. It's calling out the contradictions in religion in this particular instance in kind of the fundamentalist Christianity. It's calling out the need for updating a text to be relevant to the time that we're living in, and so many other things. I just absolutely loved it. I think this is a really good contender for the Republic of Conscious Prize for the US. That's also in the UK, but last year it came to the US for the first time, and I really think that this could be a nominee. I'm starting to think through what I feel could be nominated, because I want to do a predictions video for that early next year before they come out with the long list. I encourage other people, if you're a content creator, to do that as well. Sarah, this would be so interesting for you to do, since I know you're also interested in that prize. But yeah, I would love for people to be as interested in the Republic of Consciousness Prize as they are like the Booker or anything like that. So I think this could really be a contender. Absolutely loved it. Highly recommend. I think it has very good potential to be my favorite book of the year so far. So that is the Book of Eve. Next up, we have The Pisces by Melissa Broder. This is published by Hogarth, and it's the second Melissa Broder I read this year. I read Milk Fed earlier in the year, loved it. Part of why I wanted to pick this up. This came out before Milk Fed, and I think it's really interesting, having read both of them in the same year, how interconnected they are. The main character does feel similar to me in a way, not in a way that I disliked. I enjoy this character, but the same brand of messiness, let's say. And I do think I liked Milk Fed slightly better. I believe that the Pisces walked so Milk Fed could run. But let me tell you what the book is about. So this is about, what is her name? Lucy has been broken up with by her long-term boyfriend, but they have been on and off again throughout the time that they've been together. And she's also in the midst of writing her dissertation. She's kind of depressed and isn't making any progress on her dissertation. So she decides, at the offer of her sister, to go house sit for her sister, who's going to be leaving the country for a long period of time, and kind of get into a new city in California, work on her dissertation, and yeah, just have a little bit of space from her life. So she does that, and while she is living in her sister's very nice beach house, she encounters a merman. That's not a spoiler. You can tell by the cover and the blurb that that's what's happening. So she encounters a merman, and she starts to fall in love with him. Now, a big topic of conversation in this book is the main character's love and sex addiction, and that is very heavily portrayed in this book. Similarly with Milk Fed, which explores disordered eating, and specifically an eating disorder that the main character has, this one really dives into what it's like to have sex and love addiction, and I thought it did such a phenomenal job of that. I don't feel like that gets a ton of representation, especially from a female perspective. And again, it just felt so real, which is how I felt about Milk Fed as well. It seems like she really did her research, and the inner thoughts of what it's like for someone going through this were just messy. And I think that's realistic, and I really, really enjoyed it. Plus, there's this fun element of her falling in love with a merman. This does have trigger warnings in it, just like Milk Fed does, so look those up beforehand. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think it's a great combination of being plot and character driven, and I just think Melissa Broder does that so well. I'm so excited for Death Valley that comes out later this year. So that is The Pisces. Next up, we have The High House by Jessie Greengrass, and this is published by Scribner. This one was from my book haul revisit from last month, and I put this on as like a secondary option. This isn't even the one that I said like I need to read it this month, but I got to it, so I'm happy that I got to it. And it is a dystopian novel about climate change. So there is a couple who are both activists, and they are very heavily involved in climate work and really believe that sort of the end of the world is coming, and are trying to get the governments to do something. They also decide to build the High House, which is a kind of piece of land that they have built a very sustainable house on the property. So they grow their own food. There's a water source, like lots and lots of things, so they can try and be as sustainable as possible, because they have a daughter named Caro, and Caro is biologically related to her father, but his father's partner is her stepmother, essentially. And then they both have another child when Caro is slightly older, like I think a teenager, named Polly. And of course, Polly is much younger than her. And the couple send Caro and Polly to the high house to try and make a life for them there. There are also a couple other people living at the high house that help to run it, and that's sort of our cast of characters. This is really, a novel trying to get us to understand the consequences of climate change and sort of who the haves and the have-nots will be, but also what it might be like for a child growing up in a world that is ending, and all of the complicated feelings that go along with that. This is such a thoughtful, introspective novel, but it wasn't boring by any means. And I think if you're interested in a very contemplative dystopian novel that isn't necessarily just like action, 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 and is really about like, how do you sustain and live when the world around you is changing, but it's much more peaceful than a lot of the other ones that I've read. So that is The High House. I really enjoyed it. Thought it was great. So The High House by Jessie Greengrass. Next up, we have The Lonesome Bodybuilder. This is a short story collection by Yikiko Motoya, and it's translated from the Japanese by Yoneda and published by Soft Skull. I really enjoyed this. Can you tell I was having a great reading month? I've enjoyed everything I've read so far. And this was so interesting. Again, it's a short story collection, so kind of hard to describe. They are, as I think most short story collections are, speculative in nature, but it's really exploring themes of like domesticity and the kind of potential mystery and horrors of everyday life is maybe how I would describe it. My two favorite stories in this were the titular story, which is about a woman who becomes increasingly obsessed with being a bodybuilder and changing the way her body physically looks because she would like her husband to notice her. She feels very unseen, and almost like she has no identity, and this sort of becomes her identity. And a really good commentary about how fraught a relationship can become, even if there isn't a lot of like explicit conflict. It's like all interior. And I really enjoyed that story. I also really enjoyed the story about a married couple as well. Maybe I just like reading about married couples, where it's following a myth, a fable. I don't remember what the name of it is, but the one where like the snakes are eating each other. You know what I'm talking about? It's like forms a circle and the snakes are eating each other, from tale to tale. It's a take on that, and it's referencing that story in it as well, about a married couple whose faces start to resemble each other and they start turning into almost like creature-like things. And that one was very fascinating as well. And again, about identity and how you can sort of lose yourself in a relationship and the importance of having some type of buffer or independence in your relationship as well. So that is The Lonesome Bodybuilder. Really, really enjoyed it. And if either of those stories sound interesting to you, would highly recommend picking this up. It is one of the better short story collections that I've read in a while. So that is The Lonesome Bodybuilder. Next up, we have definitely my least favorite book of the month, but still enjoyable. I think there were pros and cons to this, and it's When I Sing Mountains Dance by Irene Sola, and this is translated from the Catalan by Faye Lethem, and this is published by Grey Wolf. It is a stunning cover, and this one is, how do I describe this? It is a whimsically told novel about spirits and nature and kind of like that exist outside of the human form maybe, but it really follows, you start by following a man who is walking one day through a trail and is killed, I believe by a bolt of lightning. and then he's sort of like reanimated, and then you start getting all these perspectives of like spirits and other narrators along the way. Now, the things that I enjoyed about this novel is the connection between humanity and the natural world, and how they are unavoidable. Even if you try to avoid it and are ignorant of it, it is still there, and it is still working behind the scenes in ways that you just might not be realizing or choosing to see. And I enjoyed that commentary a lot. I do think that this had too many perspectives for me that didn't feel distinct enough. I often became confused as to which narrator we were following, and maybe that was intentional. Maybe they were supposed to blur together, but it just made it confusing for me, and I couldn't quite pull the pieces together of what I was trying to learn. This is very similar, I think, to Poppy Show or This One Sky Day, if you're not in the US. That book is similar in many ways. One, because of this connection between humanity and the nature around it, that can sometimes be fraught and sometimes be very beautiful, but also in the language. So this has a very experimental, like, vernacular to it, and Poppy Show does as well. And Poppy Show also has a big cast of narrators and perspectives. So similar in those ways. I do think tonally they were also similar, where there's kind of difficult things happening, but the tone overall seems happier in nature. So if you liked Poppy Show or This One Sky Day, I think you would really like this. It just ultimately didn't work for me. And yeah, that's okay. Not every book has to be for me, but that is When I Sing Mountains Dance. Next up, we have Daddy's Gone A-Hunting. This is by Penelope Mortimer, and it's published by McNally Editions. This is a beautiful cover. It has kind of this flap where it reveals just the title and the author, and then this beautiful kind of fragmentary face. This one is a republished novel that I think came out in the 60s. No, it came out in the 50s, 1958, and it is supposed to be a story about feminine rage, and it is that. I did overall very much enjoy this, but there were some parts that lost me a bit. Mainly, some of the characters are so annoying. Like, oh my God. I wanted to just punch Angela so hard, who is the daughter of the narrator. But anyway, we'll get to that. So this follows Ruth. Ruth is a mother of 3. She has an older daughter and then 2 kind of younger-ish sons. They're off away at boarding school. And she is in a relationship that is basically loveless. Her partner is kind of a man-child who needs a lot of validation and is having an affair. She knows he's having an affair. He kind of knows that she knows. And one day, Angela comes to her and says that she is pregnant and needs to have an abortion. So it's about Ruth trying to help her daughter get an abortion. And while that's happening, she's also reflecting on her own experiences of being pregnant and kind of questioning whether or not she should have had an abortion. So you're getting kind of that dual narrative going on there, which I think is really interesting. And Ruth is a very compelling main character. She is timid in a lot of ways, but just dying to break free of her life, but doesn't know how she can do that. So she feels very stuck. She's depressed. And yeah, you're just following her along this journey and period in her life that all of a sudden she has to start making a lot of choices and asserting some agency. And that is something she has not done in a very long time. So yeah, really enjoyed this. Thought some of the characters, Angela, and even her husband, Rex, oh my God, were frustrating. I mean, I think they're supposed to be, but for me, it got a little over the top. And I also think this book is already short, and for me, it could have honestly been even shorter, and it could have gotten the same thing across, but still like a lovely book I would highly recommend and excited to pick up more McNally editions as well. So that is Daddy's Gone A-Hunting. And lastly, another 5-star read. So we started and ended with 5-star reads, and this is also like very much going to be in my best books of the year, and that is Osebol. And this is a nonfiction book. The subtitle is called Voices from a Swedish Village, and it's by Marit Kapla, and it's published from, and it's translated from mostly Swedish from Peter Graves. There are a couple interviews which this is essentially just all interviews of people who live in Osebol, which is a very tiny Swedish village. There are a couple that are translated from a few other languages, but it's very brief parts. Most of it is translated from the Swedish. And like I said earlier, this is just a collection of interviews. They're very vignette-y in nature, and it's about a bunch of people who live in Osebol. And I say a bunch, this village is shrinking and not a lot of people live there. There's kind of less every year because it's a very isolated small village. There aren't a lot of job prospects, but it is very beautiful and you're living out in nature, and a lot of people enjoy this isolated, slowed down pace of life. And you get these people sometimes just talking about very mundane things, other times talking about the houses that they live in, the village itself, how they came to live there and why they've stayed. And yeah, there's, just real people, because it is just real people on the page. And again, some parts can be very mundane, and I absolutely loved it. I think there's a part of this that feels so much like just a piece of history, especially because this village is shrinking, and who knows how long people are going to continue to live there. And in 100 years, maybe there isn't going to be anyone living in this village, and this is what will remain of the voices of the people that live there. And I just think as a project, I respect that so much, what this author is trying to do. And I loved this voyeuristic element of just getting to be in people's homes, having a conversation with them and learning about this place. And I absolutely loved it. I love things like this. It sort of like restores my faith in humanity, even though not everyone in here is likable, and that's okay. But yeah, it's just about people's connection to the land and a real sense of history, and I absolutely loved it. Highly recommend. It is huge. It's like 800 pages, but again, like there's not a lot of text on every page, so it doesn't take that long to get to, but absolutely love this. Highly recommend Osebol. And that is the wrap up for the month of August. I'm so happy that I'm really enjoying a lot of what I'm reading again. I'm very excited for September. Please let me know what you think of any of these books, and also let me know your favorite book from the month of August. And I will see you all in the next video. Bye.